Alfie Evans has died. We discuss the role of the state in determining his final days. We talk about potential peace in Korea, as well as the Iran deal. This is Vong, and this is A Civil Moments. Alfie Evans died on Saturday, just a month shy of his second birthday. He had been in a coma for the last year. And while the death of any child is tragic, in the case of Alfie Evans, a closer look is warranted because of the controversy that surrounds him and a question about where the rights of the parents end and where the rights of the state begin. British politician Nigel Farage summed it up this way.
What's happening here is the rights of the parent to do what they think are right are being taken away from them.
It's hard not to see it this way. Alfie Evans had been ill most of his life and had missed many developmental milestones prior to falling ill and then falling into the coma that he had been under for the last year. It's probable that he suffered from some genetic underlying condition, even though a definitive diagnosis was never presented.
Our state-run medical system decides there is nothing else that can be done, and backed up by state courts, they make a decision that those parents are not fit to move their child somewhere else. And when you think about this case, I mean, the Pope's intervened, the Italian president even granted the boy Italian citizenship, and still the medical profession and the courts say, no, we're sorry, we're putting the plug, the life support machine has been turned off.
What's extraordinary about this case is that there's so much going on here. It's really complicated. There are a lot of questions that need to be asked and a lot of questions that need to have cogent answers. The first one deals with the idea of socialized medicine in general. That is that when the doctors view Alfie's case as terminal and his death as inevitable, and they choose to withhold treatment, what are the rights of the parents? In this case, the doctors and the caregivers at the hospital took Alfie off of life support. They intended that he should progress to a natural death. This brings up all kinds of questions about the cost of modern medicine and the necessity of rationing what is essentially a scarce resource. Should it be up to the state to make the decision to withdraw life support in the case that the caregivers believe that there is no additional good that they can do to prolong the child's life? Before we confuse the issue any further, in socialized medicine, the answer to that is yes. Ultimately, there is only a single provider of care in the UK that was available to Alfie and his parents. And when they chose to end treatment, that was it. This seems to be a source of a lot of concern for folks. A lot of people want to fixate on the fact that Alfie's condition was never definitively diagnosed, that a treatment was available for him somewhere else. In the case of Charlie Gard, who was an infant who died last year under similar circumstances, his parents were fighting to bring him to the United States for additional treatment and were denied that ability. In Alfie's case, his parents were attempting to bring him to Rome, where both the Vatican and the Italian government had granted Alfie citizenship and access so that he could get treatment there. But if we're going to be honest, the odds that Alfie was going to recover, that there was some treatment available for him, is exceedingly unlikely and perhaps not possible. It was not possible for him to survive under any circumstance owing to the degenerative nature of his condition. So if we take away the arguments against socialized medicine, which are still relevant and important, But in this particular case, it's not the thing that needs discussing. It's not the crux of the situation. And those that stormed the hospital and threatened to physically remove Alfie, they were angry as well. And you had both television personalities, pundits, and just angry protesters calling the doctors and nurses and people at the hospital murderers. And we really need to take a look at this, and we really need to be clear about this. Those doctors and nurses and that hospital kept Alfie alive for over a year. And there is no doubt to me that they would have attempted everything in their ability to try to save Alfie's life. And if they had had the power to do so, Alfie would be alive today. So it's not the doctor, it's not the nurses, it's not the caregivers, and to a larger extent, it's not the hospital, and it's not the individuals that make up the whole decision-making process, nor even the judge who denied Alfie's parents the ability to take him to Rome, to Italy, to pursue other treatment. So if not the hospital, if not the caregivers, if not the protesters who were out there in good faith to try to protect a child who could not protect himself and whose parents lack the ability to do so, how did it get to this? The Children Act of 1989 allocates duties to local authorities, courts, and other agencies in the United Kingdom to ensure that children are safeguarded and their welfare is promoted. It gives power to the state in the case where the state believes that the child's individual welfare is not being properly safeguarded by their guardians. It seems such a straightforward piece of legislation. It seems so well-intentioned. But that has always been the danger of giving power to the state, giving power to the government, the unintended consequences. And here you have a judge, you have doctors who believe they are acting on the child's best interest. But in order to do that, you must believe that his parents are not acting on the child's best interest. Alfie's parents were not looking to get more resources from the state to care for their child. They were looking to move their child to a place where those resources were being offered, and they were stopped from doing so. In their arguments, the state is essentially arguing that it is in the child's best interest to be killed, to have his life support taken away from him, and to die, rather than allow his parents to take him to a waiting hospital so that he might get treatment. Think about that. The British government is saying that they have the child's best interest. They have Alfie's best interest by consigning him to die. They have his interest in higher regard than the interest of Alfie's own father, who had been giving him mouth to mouth to help his dying son breathe after they took him off the ventilators. One could argue that in the case of a parent, misguided or otherwise, who's withholding essential life-saving treatment from their child, that the government has the ability to intervene. But what possible argument can you make that says the state has a greater interest in a child's life that they intend to end than those of his parents, who are desperately trying everything they can in order to prolong his life? And where they go with this is it's a matter of dignity, that the state is seeking a dignified death for Alfie. When you are an adult, you choose what dignity means. The state has no place in defining dignity for an individual. And certainly, the state should not be able to overrule Alfie's obviously well-meaning parents when they choose how he should live and how he should die. The United Kingdom has forgotten its own poets. In the words of Dylan Thomas, do not go gently into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. The judge who ruled in Alfie's case wrote about Tom, Alfie's father, this, quote, his core dilemma from which he struggles to escape is that whilst he recognizes and understands fully that the weight of the evidence spells out the futility of Alfie's situation, he is, as a father, unable to relinquish hope. We are not talking about Alfie's father's hope. We are not talking about trying to control Alfie's father's thoughts. We talk specifically about denying Alfie's father the right to act, and that is wrong. We don't have that kind of environment yet here in the United States. If such a situation were to occur, the courts here, at least in the past, we haven't had anything similar specifically, but the courts here respect that the individual, wherever they might be in the chain of command, would have the final say on a child's care. There's a lot of room to feel strong emotion in this case. It's easy to be angry, and we should be angry. But it's important that we recognize that other than Alfie's parents, probably no one would have liked to have seen Alfie recover more than his doctors and nurses. So I think it's wrong to lay blame at their feet. As far as the hospital administrators, their doctors are telling them that Alfie's cause is lost. And because of the environment that they're in, again, medical care is a scarcity. And that is what creates its great expense. And in this case, that bed that Alfie was occupying needed to be open in order to save potentially some other child's life. They were making the call that they had to make as well. And even the judge in this case is doing what he thought was right based on the laws as they are written. And so if there is anger for the British public, we must always look at ourselves. What can we do to change the outcome, the situation? And in this case, it's looking at the laws that are being proposed, understanding that protecting the children might mean something else than what was intended on a given day. Hopefully, Alfie's situation can prove to be more than just a warning for the people of the United States. Hopefully, in Great Britain, they will be able to look at this and start asking questions about who gets to make the decisions for a child. Do the rights of the parents outweigh the rights of the state to make that determination? I think it definitely should. But I have no doubt that in the coming days, situations like these will repeat themselves, and the questions will constantly be raised. The trick is that those questions don't die away, because I also have no doubt that you won't hear again about Alfie Evans for months or years until the next case arises. Then he will be a footnote, like the case of Charlie Gard in Alfie Evans' case. The risk then is that at some point, the footnotes don't appear any longer, and now you're faced with a new normal. And this Alfie Evans case and Charlie Gard's case will just be the way things are. And that would be an even greater tragedy than the loss of Alfie and the loss of Charlie. In other news, last week Kim Jong-un met with his South Korean counterpart in South Korea. About 2 weeks ago, North Korea had unilaterally decided to end its nuclear testing program. At the time, the question on my mind and the mind of many observers was, what was the ulterior motive? There's been a lot of reason to be cautious when North Korea makes announcements like this. Shortly after this announcement, it was determined that satellite imagery of the North Korean test site indicated that it had potentially collapsed and that North Korea was in no shape to continue testing nuclear weapons. Well, that makes it simple then. If you can't do it, no harm at all to say, hey, we're going to stop doing it. Analysts are now poring over that satellite data, and there's some indication that their ability to test nuclear weapons is not completely mitigated, that they could still use that test facility in order to conduct additional nuclear tests. So their offer to stop nuclear testing may have some real meaning after all. Kim Jong-un has made a lot of overtures at this point, and his visit to Moon Jae-in, South Korea's president, is a real step forward. It has the potential to be a very good thing and do a lot for the stability of the world and certainly the region at large. North Korea has a pledged aim of a nuclear-free Korean peninsula, and they intend to enter a peace treaty with the South Korean government, which will, in effect, end the Korean War, which in its current state is merely a prolonged truce. North Korea has also shifted its time zone 30 minutes so that the time in North and South Korea will be the same in an effort to normalize relations and as a sign of goodwill. And in talks between North and South Korea, they have agreed to an arms reduction in the region pending the easing of military tensions. There's a lot of way you could read this. South Korea's current government has stated that they would like for the American troops based there to leave. And President Trump has signaled that he would like those troops to come home. Obviously, this is strategically in North Korea's interests. The danger is you pull the troops out, a conflict arises, and you find the troops rushing back into a very tense situation, potentially kicking off another regional conflict. North and South Korea have also said that they want to change the DMZ, or the demilitarized zone, that divides the two countries into a peace zone by ceasing propaganda broadcasts. Well, in the case of the propaganda coming from North Korea into South Korea, it is very much ineffective because the South Korean people are free. They are able to access the internet. They are able to consume Western media. They are able to consume whatever media they so choose. And so it's laughable to believe that that propaganda has had any real effect. Conversely, the propaganda that is coming from South Korea into North Korea is exposing the North Koreans that get those broadcasts to a reality in a world which is completely alien to them. They live in a bubble created by the North Korean government where Kim Jong-un is the supreme leader and all else in the world is a much worse place, which of course is not true. It's also worth remembering that the so-called peace zone or peace border was the same place where a North Korean defector was shot multiple times before he was rescued by South Korean border guards, and subsequently that North Korean was dewormed in a hospital because the situation in North Korea is such that if you are fed at all, you are eating crops that are fertilized with human waste, and so you are basically riddled with parasites. And this only happened about 5 or 6 months ago. So what's changed? What is the motivating factor behind North Korea coming down for this historic summit? That's a good question. That's a question that a lot of people would like to know. It could be posturing in advance of the summit that President Trump intends to have with North Korea. It might be that they have achieved the nuclear weapons gains that they are satisfied with and have an aim towards ending any further research. There could be internal struggles in North Korea, a power struggle. There could be a even larger than normal famine going on that threatens Kim's power base. It's hard to say. It also might be that it is an inroad to peace. That has to be considered. That would be an excellent outcome if it were the truth. I think a healthy skepticism is absolutely warranted. 3 generations of Kim's family have dangled peace and an end to nuclear arms in front of American presidents and the world, and ultimately none of them have kept their end of that bargain. It's quite possible that once Kim gains what he is attempting to gain, that while this diplomacy is going on, his nuclear test facilities are being repaired, and having gained access to food or money or whatever it is that he hopes to gain, he will travel back into his closed country, shut down the walls, and rule as he did before, a tyrant to his people and ostracized from the international community. Trump walks into this summit with that very real possibility that our extension of the olive branch is being met with deception. But it is also important that if there is the possibility for lasting peace in the region and an end to the instability that North Korea represents, that the whole world, and certainly everybody who lives in the United States as well, have an interest in a real and lasting peace in the Korean Peninsula. This is also an opportunity from a humanitarian standpoint to bring those people who today live under Kim's tyranny to experience something better than what they have, whose choice today might consist of either starving or infecting themselves with debilitating parasites, if they even get to make that choice. It is not the United States' place in the world to end all tyrannies. It is not the United States' position in the world to unilaterally end all famine and all poverty. Such a thing is not possible. Such a thing would be an exercise in futility. People who live under the rule of dictators whose suffering is the power by which those dictators rule are in a way insulated from what we can do for those people absent regional conflicts and greater war that might end up causing more suffering than it would alleviate. So an opportunity to bring hope and freedom and liberty, or even just food, to people who otherwise wouldn't have it, when the cost is not our blood and treasure, must be embraced. Because the whole idea behind the American experiment is that freedom and individual liberty are important and have value for every individual, and we are all better served in a more peaceful world. But that is not to say that every opportunity for a more peaceful world ought to be run into with eyes shut, with the national interests of the American people a dispensable afterthought. We need to remember that Winston Churchill was the right one, that certain tyrannies and certain powers must be met with resolve, and that appeasement is not a viable strategy. Halifax's and Neville Chamberlain's position were wrong. The appeasement of unreasonable dictators never ends well. It's just kicking the can down the road. Hard decisions that need to be made should be made now. And this is not to incite conflict. This is not to incite war. But it is a false dichotomy to say on the one side is appeasement and the other is bellicosity and the desire for war. Those are not the only two options. In the case of Iran, Trump is due to make an announcement on the Iran deal in the next couple of weeks. Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel and a vocal critic of the Obama-Iran deal, revealed on Monday that his government had received, or rather obtained, a, as he put it, half-ton of intelligence regarding Iran's secret nuclear weapons programs.
Iran lied. Big time. After signing the nuclear deal in 2015, Iran intensified its efforts to hide its secret nuclear file. A few weeks ago, in a great intelligence achievement, Israel obtained half a ton of the material inside these walls.
Now, there's no doubt that Netanyahu is attempting to convince the Trump administration that it should rescind the 2015 Iran nuclear weapons deal. But even if the objective of Netanyahu's press conference on Monday was to influence this decision-making process, it is still useful to look at the information that is being presented.
Iran lied about never having a nuclear weapons program. 100,000 secret files prove that they lied. Even after the deal, Iran continued to preserve and expand its nuclear weapons know-how for future use.
In 1967, when Iran's first nuclear reactor went critical, it was the U.S. that supplied them the 5-megawatt Tehran research reactor. It operated on uranium enriched to about 93%, which was also provided by the United States. In 1970, the Iranian parliament ratifies the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. In 1979, after the Iranian Revolution, the Iranians halt their nuclear projects. In 1984, the U.S. Department of State adds Iran to its list of state sponsors of terrorism, effectively imposing the first round of sweeping sanctions on Iran. But only 3 years later, in 1987, Iran acquires the technical schematics for building a centrifuge from the Abdul Qadir Khan network. Abdul Qadir Khan is a Pakistani former nuclear physicist and engineer who founded the uranium enrichment program for Pakistan's atomic weapons program. Khan's network and his organizations were responsible for the proliferation of nuclear information to Libya, North Korea, Iran, and China during the 70s. In the 80s, Khan and his associates were widely suspected to have conducted espionage at the Urenco Group to steal centrifuge technology, which was then disseminated to Pakistan, China, and others, including Iran. In August of 2002, the National Council of Resistance on Iran, the political wing of the terrorist organization MEK, holds a press conference and declares that Iran has built nuclear facilities near Natanz and Arak. In September of 2003, the IAEA, or the International Atomic Energy Agency, adopts a resolution calling for Iran to suspend all enrichment and reprocessing related activities. This resolution requires Iran to meet its conditions by October 31st of 2003. By the 21st of October, Iran has agreed to meet the IAEA demands by the October 31st deadline. By June of the following year, in 2004, the IAEA rebukes Iran for having failed to cooperate with the inspectors, and Iran responds by refusing to suspend enrichment-related activities. In November of 2004, Iran notifies the IAEA that it will suspend enrichment-related activities, following talks with France, Germany, and the United Kingdom in exchange for not being referred to the UN Security Council. By February of the following year, in 2005, Russia and Iran conclude a fuel agreement where Russia would provide fuel to the Iranian reactor and Iran would return the spent fuel to Russia. The idea here being that Iran would not attempt to extract plutonium for weapons from the spent nuclear fuel. But by August of 2005, Iran begins producing uranium hexafluoride at its enrichment facility. And by September of 2005, the IAEA once again adopts a resolution finding Iran in noncompliance. In February of 2006, the following year, the IAEA refers Iran to the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council says, "You will stop refining uranium." 2 days later, Iran says, "We will stop refining uranium." 2 months later, Iran announces that it has enriched uranium for the first time. 2 months after that, the UN Security Council, on July 31st, 2006, adopts a resolution making the IAEA's calls for Iran to suspend enrichment legally binding for the first time. By the end of that year, December 23rd, the UN Security Council unanimously adopts a resolution imposing sanctions on Iran for its failure to suspend its enrichment-related activities. In March of 2007, the following year, the UN Security Council adopts a resolution in response to Iran's continued failure to comply with the Council's demand to suspend uranium enrichment. 2008, Iran is still proceeding with its uranium enrichment and is still under sanctions. 2009, Iran announces that it successfully carried out its first satellite launch, potentially creating an avenue by which to deliver the nuclear weapons it is seeking. In September of 2009, Iran confirms the existence of a second enrichment site, and it's gone on that way since about 2010. Iran continues to develop either its nuclear capabilities, it continues to try to attempt to enrich uranium, or it's been trying to develop its ballistic missile programs. It's on that basis that the Trump administration would like to revisit the Iran agreement. Part of it is the underlying feeling that Iran, throughout its history, has been, and it's hard to argue against this, that Iran has not been forthcoming about its programs, and that while it may halt its nuclear weapons programs for the duration of these agreements in order to get relief from the sanctions and restart its economy, it is simultaneously working on the means of delivery for the weapons that it intends to, at some point, acquire.
Why would a terrorist regime hide and meticulously catalog its secret nuclear files if not to use them at a later date? Iran lied again in 2015 when it didn't come clean to the IAEA as required by the nuclear deal. And finally, the Iran deal, the nuclear deal, is based on lies. It's based on Iranian lies and Iranian deception.
There's no doubt that Israel and Iran are ardent adversaries. But there's also no doubt that in the region, Israel is an ally of the United States, and Iran has had quite a difficult history with the American government and the American people. Iran is still a state sponsor of terrorism. Iran still supports elements of extremists and terrorists in the Middle East, and Iran is still involved in the Syrian civil war on the side of those committing atrocities. So the Iran nuclear deal is limited, or was limited, to an attempt to control Iran's nuclear ambitions. But there are other concerns, and the Trump administration is now looking to push into expanding that deal to include ballistic missile programs. At any rate, it may be a moot point. The Iranians themselves have said whether or not the United States rescinds the terms of the deal, that the deal in its current form is, quote, "The status quo of the deal is simply not sustainable for us, whether or not the Americans get out of the deal." The Iranians themselves wish to further enrich uranium to a level that they are not permitted to under the current deal, and certainly under any subsequent deal. And so they view the deal as perhaps having run its course. We'll have to see what President Trump's administration does in the upcoming weeks. And speaking about Trump's administration, Trump gained an unusual fan over the past couple of days. Rap superstar Kanye West came out with a bunch of tweets supporting Donald Trump, including a picture of him wearing a MAGA hat. Laura Ingraham once wrote a book about the Dixie Chicks entitled Shut Up and Sing. She recently said of LeBron James, shut up and dribble. It's obviously mean-spirited, but the idea being that if you are an entertainer and you are not well educated or well versed on political subjects, that you would be using your outsized influence in a way inconsistent with its perceived value. All right, that's fair. But Laura's not saying that about Kanye now. And for all those people on the left who tolerated and defended LeBron James when he spoke out critically of President Trump and who came to the defense of the Dixie Chicks, they are now not just mysteriously silent, but are questioning Kanye West's mental capacity and mental health. This just goes to show that our national obsession with celebrity is unhealthy, and also that we are rife in our political discourse with hypocrisy. And if there is anything that we as individuals can do to better ourselves, it is to take a good close look at how we act and interact with the world and try to limit and eliminate our hypocrisies wherever possible. As for Kanye, like the Dixie Chicks and like LeBron James, they can say whatever they want. And they are free to reap the rewards and benefits and criticisms that any public speech can earn. When Kanye rushed the stage at the Grammys in 2009 to take Taylor Swift's Grammy from her, this is what President Obama had to say.
The young lady seems like a perfectly nice person. She's getting her award. What's he doing?
Why would he do that?
He's a jackass.
Obama's words, not mine. We're civil around here. You keep doing you, Kanye. If you've enjoyed this program or found it informative or enlightening, please subscribe. The Civil Moment podcast is new, and your support and involvement is greatly appreciated and absolutely vital if we are to continue doing this. Listen to our podcast on iTunes or SoundCloud and leave a review. Our audio is now also available on YouTube. Follow us on social media at Facebook or Twitter. Like and share our podcast announcement. It all helps. You can contact us by sending an email to podcast@civilmoment.com or visiting us on our website at www.civilmoment.com. Thank you. Until next time, I'm Vong, and this has been A Civil Moment. This podcast, copyright 2018, Phase Final Incorporated.